and greetings, y'all. Proud Filipina Charm Zespina here, who just like you and just about everyone else on the planet prays for an end to Israel's war against Hamas in the condemned and crumbling Palestinian city of Gaza. October 7, 2023, a day just like December 7, 1941, that will live in infamy. In the words of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a day when Hamas fighters in a well-prepped and coordinated plan breached the Israel-Gaza fence on many points to attack and assassinate all Jews who came into view and those inside their homes in Kibbutzim and elsewhere. It was an assault that began a few minutes before 7 a.m. and lasted till mid-afternoon. And when the last Hamas fighter had gone back to Gaza, an estimated 1,400 Israeli men, women, kids, soldiers, and even infants were put to the gun and sorted, torched, and tortured before being brutally slain. In addition, at least 240 Israelis, Americans, Europeans, and Asians were abducted and taken back to Gaza as hostages. This is VOA's first offering in a series-long presentation of Israel at War.
This week on The Inside Story, Israel suffers a deadly, large-scale, coordinated attack at the hands of the terrorist group Hamas. Militants turned kidnappers holding hostages as collateral, while allies say they stand with Israel. What's happened so far, and what's next in the conflict? Now, on The Inside Story, Israel at War.
Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Anita Powell, White House correspondent for VOA. Israel's response, a massive airborne barrage into Gaza, has been swift and significant, and Palestinian authorities report the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 1,000 people, with over 5,000 wounded. Israel says this is just the beginning of their military response.
All of our enemies will know that it was a grave mistake to attack Israel. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
International reaction has been overwhelming in its condemnation of the attacks.
The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews. This was an act of sheer evil.
In the wake of the attack, Iran's support for the Palestinian group Hamas is in the spotlight. VOA's Henry Ridgewell reports.
The Hamas attack on Israel took most regional powers by surprise, but many analysts say Iran would have approved the assault in advance.
Iran has been for several years supporting Hamas through funding and through training and through military equipment. Decisions to engage in war by these groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and others can only happen with explicit prior direct agreement from Iran. But this is very different from saying that Iran ordered these groups to do these attacks.
Iran has described Hamas's actions as the manifestation of resistance, but denied any responsibility. Israel's President Isaac Herzog blamed an evil axis whose base is in Iran. Israeli officials say there is no direct evidence that Tehran directed the attack.
This is an operation that was launched by a Palestinian group for its own Palestinian reasons. Hamas is not an operative or a proxy of the Iranian regime. Although there may be convergences of interests.
What interest would Iran have in renewed conflict between Hamas and Israel? Geopolitical alliances are shifting fast. Saudi Arabia and Israel are attempting to normalize diplomatic relations, supported by the United States. the Palestinian Authority, a domestic rival to Hamas, is taking part in the talks.
The deal involved Saudi Arabia talking to the Palestinian Authority. Hamas was not part of this discussion, and therefore Hamas felt, first of all, that it needed to be part of any solution to the Palestine-Israel conflict. And so we're talking about a geopolitical context in which Hamas and also its backer Iran want to set the political agenda.
Meanwhile, Tehran's negotiations with the West over a return to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and a lifting of sanctions have stalled.
Troublemaking is negotiating by other means. And I believe that this is applicable to this situation. I'm not sure Iran is seeking a larger confrontation. As I said, it's probably seeking attention and seeking basically to convince the big powers involved in the region, particularly the United States, to take Iranian role in the region seriously.
Washington should reassess its Iran policy, argues Khatib.
U.S. foreign policy has focused on Iran's nuclear file and has, in a way, pushed Iran's regional role to the margins. I think there is now no denying that Iran's regional role needs to be central to U.S. policy.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Sunday he had not yet seen direct evidence of Iranian involvement in the Hamas attack. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country's response would change the Middle East. He did not elaborate on what this meant. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu compares Hamas to ISIS in a call for international unity against the organization. Biden echoes that description and outlines America's support to its staunch Middle East ally. Repeating live on air, "We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel."
President Joe Biden minced no words in describing the shock and horror of Hamas' surprise attack on Israel.
This was an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered, not just killed, slaughtered in Israel. Among them, at least 14 American citizens killed. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children. Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed. Entire families slain.
And he clarified Washington's stance on Israel's counteroffensive.
We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse.
To that end, he said the U.S. has sent a strike carrier group to the region, and he says he'll ask Congress, once a new House Speaker is elected, to take urgent action to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners. Analysts say the carnage has touched a raw nerve at the White House, which illuminated itself in Israel's color over the tragedy.
There may be Americans captured by a terrorist group, and that's got to be a priority of any American president. And the second issue is coming to terms with the deaths of Americans in a terrorist attack in Israel. Add to that all the complexities of a very difficult regional situation. And it involves not only Israel and Hamas, but the possibility of Hezbollah and Iranian involvement. So President Biden is trying to wrestle with all these.
VOA asked the White House whether Biden asked Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to exercise restraint in his military response.
And nobody wants to see innocent life taken. And there, as I said, there's been too much of it. One of the great things about our relationship with Israel is that we're two vibrant democracies, and we mutually believe in things like the respect for innocent life and the rule of law. And we're always stronger together, our two countries, when we show that to the world, that we do respect innocent life and that we do respect the not only the rule of law, but the law of war.
U.S. adversaries were quick to point blame.
Unfortunately, we can see a sharp deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. I think that many will agree with me that this is a clear example of the failure of the policy of the United States in the Middle East, which tried to monopolize the resolution, but unfortunately was not concerned with finding compromises acceptable to both sides.
Kirby said conflict in Israel won't take Washington's eye off other threats, wherever they are.
Any nation who might think that somehow the United States is going to get distracted should think again. We are a large enough, big enough, powerful enough country, economically viable enough. In fact, the economy is incredibly strong right now, that we can look after our national security interests and those of our allies and partners anywhere around the world.
Nor, Biden said, will he walk away from Israel.
On the heels of President Biden promising U.S. support to Israel, Secretary of State Antony Blinken plans to visit the region in a show of support for Israel's right to self-defense. Meanwhile, analysts say the Hamas attacks further complicate U.S. diplomacy with respect to Saudi-Israeli normalization. As VOA State Department Bureau Chief Nike Ching reports, the U.S. continues coordinating with regional allies to deter any country that may take advantage of the situation.
Israel has declared control over the Gaza border while continuing its airstrikes on Hamas infrastructure in Gaza. This comes in the aftermath of unprecedented attacks by the Palestinian militant group and despite their threats to execute hostages. In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading to Israel to show solidarity. The top diplomat has spoken to foreign ministers from the region, as one of the diplomatic priorities is to prevent violence from spreading to other parts of the Middle East.
Secretary Blinken will be traveling to Israel in the coming days to engage our Israeli partners directly about the situation on the ground and how we can continue to best support them in their fight against the terrorists who launched these horrific attacks. Our support for Israel is unwavering.
U.S. officials have pledged American support in efforts to free hostages taken during the Hamas assault. U.S. citizens are among the captives.
There are a number of countries who have the ability to deliver messages to Hamas, and we have made clear to those countries that they should urge Hamas to release all hostages immediately.
While Israel indicated it does not want any pause in efforts to reach a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, the recent Hamas attacks have complicated the diplomatic efforts for such a deal, according to analysts.
The current outbreak of war will likely set that back, including timelines back. It doesn't necessarily mean that normalization of ties will be over, but I think for now, the focus is going to be on various aspects of the war itself and aid to the Israelis.
The United States has said the pursuit of a diplomatic deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia could not replace a two-state solution to address the needs of the Palestinian people, and Hamas does not represent their legitimate aspirations for an independent state of Palestine. Nike Ching, VOA News, Washington.
The reaction from Capitol Hill to the war in Israel has been strong and clear regarding U.S. support for Israel's right to defend itself. Our VOA Persian service spoke with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who placed blame on Iran for the attacks and discussed the actions taken by the U.S. to assist Israel.
I've seen, video images of little toddlers in cages like animals, and the indiscriminate killing. It's been in the works for probably over a year. Iran is behind this. Iran funds it. Iran gives the weapons. My message to Iran is stay out of this, and to Hezbollah, stay out of this. The United States is going to protect and defend Israel. We've already sent a battleship to the region, and this is not the way to carry out. You have diplomacy, discussions, fine, but killing innocent civilians is not the way to go about this.
Hamas militants also kidnapped scores of people from various backgrounds and nationalities in their attack, taking them back to Gaza and making a promise ahead of escalating Israeli counterstrikes. For every residential target with women and children hit by Israel, Hamas says it will broadcast the execution of a hostage. VOA has a look at the swelling anger along the Gaza Strip.
Israelis living in the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip have been evacuated, and rockets continue to shoot out of the enclave. The more than 2 million Palestinian people inside are trapped, as it is pummeled by heavy weaponry day and night. Among the civilians in Gaza are as many as 150 Israeli hostages. Family members are terrified that their loved ones will not be rescued.
I don't know how it is going to end, but the end will not be a happy end. For nobody. It's not a happy end for nobody.
Humanitarian groups inside Gaza say the crisis is deepening for civilians already cut off from the world, and now cut off from outside resources like electricity, water, and food. In Jerusalem, about an hour and a half from Gaza and still close enough to sometimes take rocket fire, many Israelis are enraged by the conflict, saying despite their government's famed security prowess, it failed to protect them. Others in this market blame the Palestinian people as a whole, saying the two sides of this conflict have never been more at odds.
I say it again, or us or them. We can stop. We need to eat them and eat them strong.
Hamas, the militant group that launched the surprise attack on Saturday, rules in Gaza. Hundreds of civilians on both sides have been killed, and thousands have been injured. Outside the Gaza Strip, debris from the first days of this new war remains on the abandoned streets, as Israel mounts its forces for what may soon be even more of an escalation. VOA News reporting from Jerusalem, Kfar Daniel, and southern Israel.
The current conflict is complex and confusing, and defies comprehension. To help us understand what happened and why, and what may come next, we reached out to a few Mideast experts for their reaction. Here's what they told us.
I don't think, based on what happened and the severity of the losses for Israel, that Israel can afford to leave Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip. Israel will not again see Hamas as a necessary evil or a partner that it can deal with in Gaza. I think that game is over.
I would be surprised if Iranian officials, despite their denials, were not aware of what Hamas was planning. I think there is also tremendous concern that we may see other groups that have been supported by Iran. I'm thinking of Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, Hezbollah in the north, get involved in this conflict, especially as Israel pounds Gaza.
And so it's obviously an intelligence failure, but I think it's also a political failure on the part of this far-right Israeli government. They have touted themselves as the government that will bring Israel security once and for all. And so what Hamas has done is to shatter that sense of complacency, I think irrevocably.
Longtime Middle East correspondent Linda Gradstein has covered Israel for more than 30 years. She says the current situation, a war on the home front, is unlike anything she has reported on before. Here she is in Jerusalem, in her own words.
I'm Linda Gradstein. I'm based in Jerusalem for Voice of America. I'm standing here on my balcony in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has actually been relatively quiet. We've had a few rockets. We've had to go into our bomb shelter. Every apartment in Israel is built with a bomb shelter.
I have to say that I've been reporting on this conflict for almost 40 years, and I have never seen anything like this. You know, Israel's a very small country, and everybody knows somebody who has been affected by this war. So I think there's a feeling in the streets of Jerusalem, people are scared and people are also angry. They're very angry at Hamas. You know, earlier an interviewer asked me if Israelis are concerned about what's going on in Gaza, and I said not at all. I think the fact that there's a sense that Israelis want this to end, but they want to see it through. At the same time, as a journalist, the home front is here. There's been a lot of propaganda on both sides. I think now people are sort of trying to understand and trying to be a little bit more careful about what they report. I'm trying very hard not only to report things that I know are true and to verify things before I report them, and I think that's really the obligation of every journalist. I think the Israeli government has been very good about trying to reach out to journalists. I get sort of minute-by-minute updates from the Israeli army spokesman with videos and all kinds of things. So I think it's been a challenge to report on this war. I think we're finally understanding how do we go about it. I think we're trying to be very careful about what we do. And sometimes it's hard. I mean, I have been working basically around the clock for 5 days. None of us have slept very much. And every once in a while I do find myself crying. I think about these young people. One of the people who's a hostage in Gaza is the son of friends of mine. He's 23 years old. They've been very open about trying to get the international community on board to try to get him out of Gaza. That hits close to home. And I personally think that it's okay to bring who you are as a journalist to your reporting, but you still have to verify everything. I also think of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and in my reporting, I've been really trying to make contacts with people in Gaza. I have a friend who said that she and her mother in Gaza evacuated to a school, a United Nations run school, because they have nowhere to go. So I think that it's a challenge to do this kind of reporting. I still feel like it's a privilege to do this kind of reporting.
Journalists covering wars in this digital age regularly find themselves reporting on two fronts: the physical battle and the flood of disinformation and propaganda shared online. This conflict is no different. From Washington, VOA's Robin Guess has the story.
Bombings and airstrikes blast targets across Israel and Gaza following Hamas's deadly terror attack on Israel Saturday and Israel's counteroffensive. At the same time, disinformation about the conflict exploded online with a force that has shocked analysts.
It is worse than the lead up or following January 6th. It's worse than the height of the COVID-19 pandemic or vaccination rollouts. This is just, quite frankly, the most intense amount of misinformation that I've seen spread on social media as far back as I can remember.
Among the posts going viral on platforms like TikTok and X that groups like MediaWise are working to debunk is this fake video clip. It claims that Ukraine smuggles weapons to Hamas, and it has racked up close to 1 million views, but the post and video are false. Another shows children in cages and claims that they are Israelis kidnapped by Hamas, but watchdogs found that the video was posted on TikTok days before Saturday's attack. And in this last example, both the post and the reporter are fake. The BBC has neither a correspondent by the name of Verona Mark nor a talk show called American Inside. X later suspended the account for violating platform rules. In an active conflict zone, journalists can't always access the hardest hit areas, which creates information voids, and disinformation often fills that vacuum.
It means that a lot of the misinformation and propaganda online can undermine efforts for, timely, accurate information that the public needs, and also millions around the world.
Social media can help journalists broadcast the truth, but it can also allow false news to flourish. Some media experts have pointed out changes at X, formerly Twitter, including its staffing cuts that have resulted in the spread of disinformation.
I think by habit, a lot of journalists like myself, and then a lot of regular people, flocked to X, formerly Twitter, to find out what was happening with the Israel-Hamas war. Now, unfortunately, the new X the entire trust and safety team has been essentially gutted. So you're not seeing the same amount of staffing that were involved with pulling down mis and disinformation and moderating even violent and hateful conduct.
The European Union on Tuesday reminded ex-owner Elon Musk and social media platforms of their legal requirements to not share such content. Musk replied via X saying his platform was transparent, and he called on the EU to list the alleged violations. Meanwhile, amid such abundant disinformation about the conflict, journalists must sort fact from fiction to ensure audiences have access to credible news. Robin Guess, VOA News.
As we leave you, here's how these iconic landmarks from Europe to the United States showed their support for Israel. For more on this rapidly developing situation, stay informed by visiting voanews.com. That's all for now. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. Follow me on Twitter at 6ArmsPowell. Catch up on past episodes with our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm Anita Powell at the White House.
And that's a wrap for today. Hope you came out as enlightened as we did. We look forward to you joining us for tomorrow's Inside Story offering. And here's reminding you to work hard and dream big. Count those blessings and be kind, and catch the news right here. This has been Sharm Zespina for Stories from the Grid.